Okay, got it. Oh, and I have a fairly hard stop at 90 minutes, just FYI.
Okay.
That's what is on the, whatever's on the calendar. Yeah.
The radical fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brooks Show.
All right, everyone. Welcome to Yaron Brooks Show on this Thursday night. It's the night I interview some of my favorite people, which is a blast. It's been a lot of fun. So tonight we've got Alex Epstein. I don't think we have to really introduce him. I think everybody on the Yaron Brooks Show knows who Alex is. And if you're curious about his books, just look behind him right there.
Yeah, all right. You can see how big this one is.
Yeah, and that's the one you should be getting. That's the updated and changed and much more ultimately much more convincing than even the first. But so definitely get the book. I haven't told Alex this, but on Thursdays we have this competition going on between our different guests to see who can produce the most super chat revenue questions. So I've adjusted the target for today to get to so that Alex will move into number one. So if we reach the target, which is $900, Alex would move above Gina Golan, who is the current leader, and get the first position, number one, in our little competition going on here. A competition that I benefit from 100%. So
yeah, I remember there's no revenue sharing in this.
There's no revenue sharing in the Yaron Book Show. So I've had people complain about that, but
it's okay. I support the policy.
There you go. All right. So Alex, thanks for joining us. And I'm going to switch views so that it's on speaker view. Thanks for joining me tonight.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So I thought we'd focus today, or we talked about focusing today on really the kind of responses to Fossil Future. And it's been reviewed quite extensively. And I know you've had a lot of people in the industry and outside of the industry commenting on it. So I think everybody's really curious. We kind of have a broad sense of the positive impact you're having, and let's start with the positive. But give us a little bit of some concretes about kind of the positive way in which the book and you are changing the debate out there, and the kind of commentary that it's receiving.
Okay, we can start with the book. So the book, I don't have perfect numbers, but according to my numbers from Penguin, which are pretty good, if you look at the numbers for Fossil Future and Moral Case, so Fossil Future is outselling Moral Case total. Mm-hmm. So Moral Case has been out for 8 years, and Fossil Future has been out for
that long.
8 months.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's been it's sold better. Now it didn't officially make the New York Times bestseller list, although your audience helped quite a bit getting on all lists. It was ridiculous. I mean, it outsold every book on the list. I got the numbers. It's outsold every book on the list but one, and it outsold the number 15 book by a factor of 5. Wow. But it still didn't get on the list. So I called it a New York Times outseller to capture that. But those lists are just sort of marginally important. The main thing is just that, and even the beginning sales are sort of, that's just the hype around it. What's been exciting is just it consistently selling. I don't know if the publisher cares if I say this, but 1,000 books a week, often more than that, week after week after week. And I think it's a function of people, people really like it. This was something, it was by far the biggest investment I've ever made in my life, because I invested 3 years of time doing a new version of a book that was already popular. And, I spent a lot of time and resources trying to get the best people I could, including, I know you guys, your audience knows Onkar Ghate well, and I got him to spend a lot of time with me, and I have an amazing researcher, Stefan Henna, and other people. So it's just this crazy R&D project that had a vision of maybe it's possible to have a new level of persuasive case for continuing and expanding fossil fuel use over the next several decades that is way better than the moral case, and thus has a much bigger impact. And I was confident in it because I have so much experience talking to audiences. It's not like it's my first time communicating this. So I had confidence that this would work well. And I tried to have people review it in advance, but you never know for sure. And you always, writing books, you can always think, oh, I could have made it better in this way. But I ended up being really happy with it. And the audience, from so many people, I got the reaction that I wanted to, in terms of, wow, this is really another level. This is really persuasive. One fairly recent example was Brian Kaplan, the economist at George Mason, who's done a series of, I think, at least 5 things now talking about the virtues.
Yeah, Brian is effusive in his compliments. He's really, and Brian is, of the libertarians out there, Brian is probably the more impressive of all of them. I like Brian's writing quite a bit. He's done some really good work on things like immigration, but he's just a thoughtful guy. So having him so excited about fossil future was exciting for me to see him that thrilled. I think that also gains you a whole new audience that maybe you wouldn't have reached without it. So that's great. And then I think you did a video with him where he and this other economist asked you tough questions.
Robin Hanson, yeah, they asked me tough questions, but we're generally very, very supportive. And that's part of what you want, is people who think it's really valuable. And then some subset of them will agree with different parts and disagree with different parts and challenge different parts. And so that's happened a lot. I think one strategy I've done that I've found very effective, and I don't think everyone can do this, but at a certain level, there's so much demand for podcasts, and I couldn't fulfill much of it. But what I decided to do is I said, with every single podcast, if it's Joe Rogan, I'm not going to do this, but or Jordan Peterson. But basically I said, I will only do the podcast if you read the book. And I would just tell people, and it's a huge book, right? So it's a big commitment. Yeah. And I say to people, look, I totally understand if this is too onerous, if you don't want to do it, but that's what I want to do. And one consequence of that is so many people have read the book now who are influential. All these hosts have read it. One example, like Will Kane, who's a Fox News host, has had me on twice. And man, he was totally dialed into this book from the beginning because he had read it in advance. When you're a podcast host, it's hard. You're always looking for new content, but you don't have time to read everyone's book. So I was deliberately basically saying, hey, I'm going to take advantage of this situation. I don't just want to spend time on a podcast. I want you to have read it. In your case, this was not a challenge because you had already read it to blurb it and would have read it. You're already a likely reader anyway. But there's just been many things where I've kind of focused on creating the best possible product based on my knowledge, and then really doing everything I can to get people to read it. I send so many signed books to people. So anyone who's interested at all, I'll send a signed book to like Yeonmi Park, the North Korean freedom activist. She was one. She had written something positively about moral case, and I'm like, let me send you a copy. So many people. Excellent. I sent copies of the whole George Mason University econ department because Brian said he would distribute them. So in general, if your audience knows influential people, just email me, alex@alexepstein.com, and I'll send signed copies. So really, I'm really excited about the spread of it. And so much of the strategy has just been get as many influential people as possible to read it and just keep pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. The other thing people might be interested in that you won't see publicly is I have this thing called Energy Talking Points, which is a website, energytalkingpoints.com, but the bulk of it is actually behind the scenes. We work with elected officials and staff. And now in the basic premise is we help them with messaging, pro-freedom, pro-energy messaging and policy. And it started from nothing a couple of years ago. Now we work with 180 major offices, this US Congress, US Senate, and governor's offices, interface directly with dozens of elected officials themselves. There's no money for them. I'm not lobbying for them. I don't endorse anyone. So it's purely just giving them value. And it's been really, really exciting to see. And what's really cool to see is we're starting to see politicians speak up publicly. One the other day major person was tweeting fossil fuels promote human life and human flourishing. And you're like, oh, where does that come from? Or there's a hearing and they acknowledge it. They're not coy about it.
Sure.
There's a hearing the other day where someone was asking AOC questions, and And they said, hey, are you looking at just the negative impacts of fossil fuels or also the positive? And I'm like, oh, whoa, where did that come from? So it's super exciting to see this thing that we've created, which was the basic premise was there are a lot of politicians who on energy issues would say and do better things if they actually had this exact knowledge of how to do so. And it's creating a product that is like the thing that really flipped it was instead of just giving them high level advice, give them the exact words they need for the time that they'll need them, to quote, to basically paraphrase Francisco in Atlas Shrugged. And we've just found that doing that, plus the reputation from the book and plus all the media and stuff, it's just really becoming a force. And I hope that it leads to much better energy discussion and then ultimately much better energy policies. So that's kind of what's going on.
And I mean, you've already had even before the book, you'd already had a profound impact, it seemed, on the industry itself, at least on many of the maybe smaller entrepreneurs, maybe not on the big companies, but on entrepreneurs. Have you seen that expand? Are you still working with those entrepreneurs?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I don't work with them as much because my consulting work is exclusively with politicians. I actually just turned down all consulting work with companies because it didn't scale very well. Like to help them with, like within politics, there's a certain sphere of issues that sort of applies to everyone. Whereas in business, a lot of what a business will want you to do consulting for is something that's just specific to the business. And it's also behind the scenes. When I help politicians, if I help them with messaging on, say, I don't know, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, I can put that to the public in my name, and then they can use it however they want. Whereas when I'm doing stuff with businesses, it's contractually, it has to be behind the scenes and stuff. But nevertheless, energy talking points, because it's so broad and so extensive, is now much more effective with the corporations than private consulting with them was, because they can just get all our stuff for free. So you are seeing more and more people stand up, and the energy crisis has helped with that. Putting everything on social media has helped with that. I mean, one really cool phenomenon, and I think this has been announced, is one of my favorite CEOs, a guy named Adam Anderson, who stood up to the North Face a couple of years ago. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah, I did. He was excellent.
He's really, and then there's another guy, Chris Wright, another guy I admire a lot and know, who also has done this. And Adam, they just announced an event that they're organizing, and I may or may not participate in, but I think there's a good chance I will. It's in Midland, and it's called Fossil Fueled, the concert. So it's like this huge celebration of the industry. And just think about that, 10 years ago, it just was not happening at all. And
no,
so
and it wouldn't happen today without you. I mean, you basically are making it happen. So there's no question that without you and the books and the intellectual ammunition, they might still be generally positive towards fossil fuel, the industry, but they wouldn't have the moral courage or the backbone to actually do something like that. That's terrific.
And so it's and the thing is, I think, another thing that I think is useful is, this is true in any business, but there's so much time spent doing things that don't work for a while. And now I think we're really dialed in. And by we, I mean Center for Industrial Progress is probably just 5 of us or so, but just like figuring out what works and then really having this working system and then refining that. So we have really good practices for social media that take me very little time, and very good practices for distributing the book, and very good practices for helping politicians and where to focus the time. And I find that just makes things so much easier. And then you get with the political world, it's a small world actually, so you get all sorts of network effects. It's nice because there are so many times when I would spend months doing something and it really didn't work at all. Like, for instance, I tried to create these things called ambassador programs, which were helping the employees in the industry be more confident and be better champions. And I didn't totally fail, but nothing like my vision for it ever materialized for various reasons. And I spent a lot of time on it. And there are other things like this. And in my I've spent so much time on things that didn't work, but then once you get the things working, it's cool to see it working. It's a lot easier to make something that work better than figure out what works in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the nature of entrepreneurship, right? You're going to fail, and you're going to fail a lot of times. And it's what you do with those failures and how much you learn from them. And then what you do when you succeed and how you use all that knowledge in order to leverage that success into greater success. That's what I think every entrepreneur who starts a business goes through that process. So yeah, I mean, you have to have the right attitude, otherwise you let the failures crush you. So that's great. So you know, are you optimistic about the future in the sense that do you see enough politicians and industry coming around to the right positions that, I don't know, with the change administration or a political change, there would be significantly better energy policies in the works? Now, it's not hard to beat the Biden administration's policies, but you know, policies, you know, they're better than 10 years ago, 20 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of these things. It's a little bit surreal to think about things in terms of like what I do and what my small group of allies does, like my company did. It's a little bit surreal to think of like we're going to make a difference in that, but I do think it's true. And I do think it's true. I try not to be crazy about this, but I do think it's true. We've made a big difference in the industry and the narrative so far, and even with politicians so far. And I do think that there is this big opportunity, given we've seen that politicians are open to better messaging and policies, to create what I call an energy freedom platform or energy freedom agenda, which is not just having good answers to why is what Biden doing bad, but to actually have an agenda. And so I've put together this 5-part agenda, and I've been like trying to sell people on it, but actually a lot of it is building it out, because the actual biggest challenge I have, and this is, we're actually recruiting for some new content people, is just creating energy policies that are specific enough to be actionable by government. It's one thing to say in general, hey, we need individual rights, we need freedom, right?
Sure.
But we need something that can actually be translated into law. And what you find, at least what I found, is at the beginning, it seems like the hard part is going to be to get the demand. Like, oh, no politicians are listening to me at all. This was true 4 years ago, let alone 10 years ago. So you just think, oh, if only I could get their ear, then it would be so easy. But now I have their ear, and I'm overwhelmed with questions about, hey, what do we do about this? What do we do about this? And we have to figure that out with the level of specificity. It's very difficult. But that makes me optimistic that there's a lot of demand, and I'm not going to go into specifics of who's asking for what, but like I have way more demand from names that for help with messaging and legislation ideas. And this is before there's even a potential president. So I'm just trying to spend the next year and a half developing the policies and developing the relationships. And actually, I've gotten really interested in also the people, like knowing who are the people that can staff different departments, like because I'm not going to have I'm not going into politics directly. So who should be Secretary of Energy? Who should be Secretary of the Interior? Like, I'm really learning about these realms and getting involved, because they say personnel is policy. It's not totally true at all, but there's some substance to it. So
it's a big step forward. If you get the right personnel, they can do a lot more. And, well, just one more thing about that. So I think I think there's a real chance we'll do something amazing, and I'm working hard toward it, but absent somebody really proactively trying to advance a new agenda, there is a definite historical tendency among Republicans, and I tell them this all the time, to just react to what Democrats do. And we're seeing that even a little bit with the Congress already. Like, it's reacting to Biden on the SPR. It's reacting to the oil lease ban. There's so much of even the gas stoves thing. Like, yeah, the gas stoves thing is horrible. I've written about it. You can see it at energytalkingpoints.com, but it's like too much here reacting. Like, stop just reacting to the bad stuff and saying it's bad and looking for easy points, and actually advocate the thing that would make the most difference for liberating the industry. And I think absent a force really pushing that, and with the relationships and trust of the politicians, I don't think it's not going to happen on its own. That's what I'm convinced of. No, I agree completely. I mean, my experience with politicians is exactly that. It's easy to respond, and it's easy to be in the opposition. It's easy when somebody else is making decisions to criticize them. It's much harder to be in the decision-making chair and actually have a positive agenda and stick to that agenda, defend that agenda when it comes under criticism for the opposition. Do you find, I mean, I found when I was on Capitol Hill a little bit, that I was never impressed by the politicians, but the staffers were often really smart and pretty idealistic. That is, the staffers really wanted stuff done. Whereas I always had a sense of the politician always looking for an angle. Is that your experience, or do you have a better, better view of some of our politicians than maybe I have?
I've been surprised by how much I've enjoyed dealing with politicians. So when people, I'll give the context though, is I'm dealing with everyone in a very, very specialized way.
Yeah.
So one thing is I'm not like, they're not hitting me up for money. I make it very clear there's no money. I'm not like bringing in my industry contacts. That's not part of the deal. I'm not lobbying for any company or anything like that. So when people talk to me, it's already a reputation of, hey, this guy has really good ideas that could help you in this one realm. It's also not talking to them about every other realm. So there's other, plenty of issues where I'll disagree with them. And if it comes up, I'll tell them like, hey, I'm not religious. Like, I don't agree with this thing. Or like I had, for instance, Senator Cotton was on my podcast because he had written this book that I thought was good and he was eager to discuss it. And I asked him like, hey, I told him like, hey, I really like this and this and this about your book. And I have disagreements with like how you're explaining the foundations of rights and immigration and trade. And I said, like, I want to focus our interview on what we agree on. And then afterward, I'm going to give my views on that. And he said, like, that's totally fine. So usually people are adults about this, but I just want to say my experience is I'm talking with people who are already really interested in what I have to offer. And we're talking about this area where I'm very passionate about and they're passionate about. So I would say that I like the staffers a lot. I will say that. Like I think it's, but my experience at first was I was interacting overwhelmingly with the staffers. And I did find that was because you have this idea, oh, the staffers are doing everything, but now I'm super focused on the elected officials themselves because they really are in charge. So it's good to have both. You want to have the people who can lead the effort, but also the people who are supporting. But I would just say a lot of the people I deal with who are elected officials, like they know a lot. And they're really passionate about these issues. And one effect I think I've had and will continue to have is educating them, because the talking points, it's not talking points like fake superficial stuff. It's real stuff with real data. And it's really cool to see them speaking out.
So the talking points are online, right? I mean, you have a...
It's all, I mean, almost everything is on.
So let everybody know where they can find these.
Oh, sorry. So it's just energytalkingpoints.com. And then there's a Substack that you can also sign up for. Just it's at the top of energytalkingpoints.com. But yeah, I mean, that's Fossil Future is great. And I really hope people get it. But Energy Talking Points is like just unlimited intellectual education and ammunition, and everything fits in a tweet. So if you ever see me on Twitter or LinkedIn or Facebook, I'm using Energy Talking Points over and over and over, and I use them in media. So I just am kind of obsessive about everyone. Take advantage of this. This is a free resource. Mm-hmm. And it's just super, super valuable.
Yeah, and follow Alex. The easiest thing, follow Alex on Twitter, and then from there you can link to everything, so you'll get access to everything. So you said there were 5 kind of major pieces. I don't know, inflation or
5 steps.
What are they?
Yeah, so just quickly, and then people can look at energy freedom at energytalkingpoints.com. So at the high level, I'll just say them and then elaborate. So one is like liberate responsible development. And that's just capturing like energy requires development. We have the environmental movement makes development almost impossible. And whatever form of energy you're talking about, we need to liberate development. And responsible is just trying to capture this respects rights and doesn't unduly endanger people. So that's one. Number 2 is end preferences for unreliable electricity. So one of my basic beliefs is that the grid is messed up because we reward reliable electricity in all sorts of ways. That I could elaborate on, but those preferences need to be ended insofar as you have a monopoly, which we do throughout the country. If you're going to have markets, they need to be real markets. Today's markets pay the same or more for unreliable electricity as reliable electricity. So this is guaranteed to be a disaster, which we've seen.
So is that set by regulation, the price that they pay for the different?
Yeah, well, basically the markets were designed when there were only reliable sources of electricity, but then solar and wind came on and they started paying them as well. So like pay you for a kilowatt hour of solar in the same way as there's a lot more detail to that, but it's a total mess. It's an absolute mess. And then the subsidies actually pay you more. So it's just, you're getting a premium for selling something that's nowhere near as valuable. Third is, now this is a little bit controversial to objectivists, the formulation, but what is it? Reform air and water emissions standards based on cost benefit analysis. And so this is trying to capture the idea that when you're looking at something like what level of sulfur dioxide do you allow in the air? Like you have to think about, okay, what are the benefits that come along with that? And what are the harms that will be done if you reduce it? And what's a threshold that gives people reasonable protection, but at the same time allows industry to function? And the example I use is like when people invented fire, if you had incredibly high air pollution standards, everyone would die. And you'd say, oh, I'm protecting your health. But no, your health depends on the ability to produce things, including food. It's not just the absence of smoke.
Yeah, the example I use is similar. I use the example of the 19th century. Let's say London, there's coal, literally coal soot in the air because everybody's burning coal everywhere. It clearly had negative, harmful effects. Stop coal use in the middle of the 19th century. You end the Industrial Revolution. You end all progress. I'm dead because I'm way above life expectancy. So.
Definitely. So the fourth is this relates to the issue of CO2. So it's basically it's reduce CO2 emissions long term through liberating innovation, not punishing America. So this is the idea that we should not forcibly restrict CO2, but any policy towards CO2 should be liberating cost-effective alternatives. And then fifth is related is decriminalize nuclear. So nuclear is effectively criminalized. And then there's a whole bunch of things that need to happen to decriminalize it. So those are the 5.
That's great.
Things I'm focused on.
Yeah, I did a State of the Union address as my talk as a show a few days ago, and I had my 5 pieces of legislation. I would try. It was year 1. There was a section on liberating energy, but it was far more abstract, obviously, than what you would get into. But yes, I have year 1, year 2, year 3, and kind of the priorities in each year in kind of broad terms. But
let me take this occasion. So I love hearing stuff like that. So I'll go listen to that episode. Let me encourage people in objectivism who are interested in policy. Like maybe this is a controversial view, but I'm very in favor of coming up with good policies, both the ideal theoretical policy and the incremental policy. And there used to be a certain refrain, like, and this is an appropriate refrain for a general philosopher. It'd say something like, hey, this is for philosophy of law. Like, I don't know what to do, but it's for philosophy of law. But like, I would always think, where are those philosophers of law who are going to come up with things? And working with politicians, you learn that if you don't come up with the idea, no one is, or someone is going to come up with the bad one. So it's worth, if you're in a particular policy field, like healthcare or something like that, really think about what's the ideal policy, how can you make a case for that? And then what's the incremental policy that if somebody said to you, hey, Joe, what do I do? You want an answer to that. You don't just want to give them high level principles. You need the high level principles to come up with the policy and to justify it. But I found it's very hard work, but it's very necessary to actually work this stuff out so that, if somebody were willing to do it, it would actually work. Because if you don't have that, then how are you, they're not just going to all figure it out for you. They're not going to all apply it for you.
No, I mean, the places where I think you do need, philosophy of law is where you don't have expertise yourself, or when it really is a specific legal issue. But there's no reason we can't have. What you really need are experts like you in a particular field, because that's what it really needs. So when I do, here's my year 1 legislation, here's my year 2, they're very abstract because I haven't delved into regulation XYZ and how you would actually get rid of it. Mm-hmm. And one of the points I make is, I think libertarians and objectivists, or free market types generally, they have this notion of, we get in there and we just repeal everything. And,
right.
And you can't do that. I mean, even if you had the political power to do it, you couldn't do it, because you'd really destroy people's lives. You'd potentially, have a massive collapse before you came out of it. In order to get a kind of a smooth transition, which I think you want, you have to really think about how you would repeal the laws and which ones go first and which ones come later. You can't eliminate Social Security tomorrow. You can't get rid of banking regulations tomorrow. That's my field, So I could probably do an outline of how you would eliminate banking regulations.
Yeah, I was going to say, for finance stuff, you would have good guidance, and I think that's.
But it's
very, very it's hard.
The more regulated a field is, the harder it is to undo the mess that the regulations have created. But yes, I mean, my number 1 goal, my view is the first thing you do if you become president, right, is, and you have a better chance than I do, is is liberate business. Before you do welfare and Social Security and Medicare and taxes or any of that stuff, everything that you do, kind of the first thing is to liberate business. Because then if the economy is taking off, which it would just take off, everything else becomes simpler to do after that. You can actually get a lot of the other stuff that's actually some people are going to lose from in the short run. You can actually get it done. So that's
yeah, by the way, we both have a 0% chance of being president because I'm definitely not going to do it.
Okay.
But
you were born in America. I was not.
But yeah, there's a bunch of things. But I think it's a great point. So I will pass that on to the next president who asks my opinion.
You should definitely pass it on to politicians. If they could just focus, everything else is much easier to do when everybody's making a good living and things look very rosy in the future for the economy. All right, we've got a lot of questions.
Oh, yeah, I'm gonna make you some money.
What's that? And
Yeah,
Alex is a hard stop in an hour, so we only have until.
Okay, I'll be more efficient in my answers.
Okay, so let's turn now to some of the negative reviews. I've only seen the one, the one by Tyler Cowen.
Now, did you see that? I sent you a draft of what I was going to write because he was nice enough to. Now, he hasn't actually made good on this, but I expect he will to let me. He said he would publish what I wrote in Marginal Revolution. I'm curious, did you read the review before or after you read what I wrote?
After I read what you wrote. So.
Oh, okay. Because I would be interested in your sort of initial. Can you imagine what your reaction would have been if you had just read it straight?
I mean, I find that he is often flippant, and I think he's a little too flippant in this. Oh, Alex wants fossil fuels to infinity, right? To that's the kind of he often doesn't take people he disagrees with seriously, and he unfortunately, and I think he's very much he's a kind of a libertarian who wants to be mainstream, and he anything that's a little radical, and certainly anything that's principled, because he doesn't believe in principles. And he's explicit about that. So that's not an insult because he says it. Anything he's going to dismiss. So my attitude was, yeah, this is typical Tyler wants to play nice with the kind of conventional wisdom, and is rejecting somebody who's principled and is not really engaging with the ideas themselves. And it's sad because he's super smart and a good communicator, and at some level, when he's got a positive point to make, he's a good communicator. So, and everybody likes him. Like I see him at conferences of people who are not political necessarily, business conferences, places like that, and everybody is always around him and talking to him. And partially it's because he doesn't offend anybody. He fits in.
Interesting.
But he's super influential. He might be the most read economist right now, maybe even more than Krugman. I think Krugman is in the New York Times. Everybody reads him because in the New York Times. Yeah. I think to read Tyler, you have to go to Tyler. And I think in that sense, I don't think anybody else, even though I know better economists out there who have blogs and stuff, nobody's as popular as he is. And partially it's his eclectic stuff. He likes to write about food. He likes to write about a million different things. But all right, so let's talk. First of all, did you get negative reviews? Because I think it's a good thing to get negative reviews because it means people are paying.
Oh, yeah, I want more of them.
Yeah. Did you get negative reviews? And then let's talk specifically if you want to talk about Tyler's review.
Yeah, sure. Oh, definitely. So yeah, I was strong hope, and I did a lot to engineer this, is to get more reviews, period, than Moral Case did, and then certainly more negative reviews. With Moral Case, there was like this one negative review that was really bizarre from some UN organization, and then there was this one thing by a Harvard law professor named Jody Freeman. And what was striking about it was just we'll see this come up again and again. It was just a pure straw man. So it was basically saying, hey, Alex Epstein argues, you'll see this as a familiar theme, we should keep using fossil fuels forever, and we shouldn't use alternatives. It's like, this is not at all what I said. So they just read the cover of the book, or maybe they scanned it for confirmation. And what I did is I just responded, the Law Journal let me respond, and I responded with a straw man attack on the Moral Case for fossil fuels. And all I did was I quoted Freeman, and then I quoted the book. And it was just obvious that it was just a total misrepresentation. And I found that to be an effective way of doing it, because it's a little tricky when you write a book and somebody so straw man means instead of summarizing your argument and attacking it, your actual argument, they make a fake version of it that's easy to attack that you don't actually agree with, and then they attack that to dismiss your book. It's actually a little tricky, like to show somebody did that to a neutral audience, to a new audience, because they haven't read the book, right? So I found it necessary to like use a lot of quotations to show, hey, this is not at all accurate. So I found this also with Fossil Future. So I was happy to see from the beginning there were more reviews. So there was one in Slate, one in Foreign Policy. One of these, though, it was crazy. One of them was written by like some student activists, climate activists. It was either Foreign Policy or Slate. I think it was Foreign Policy. They just got some student activists to review the book, which I thought was pretty.
It was a serious magazine. Yeah. That's bizarre.
It was, I'm pretty sure it was them. And they're Harvard students, but they're still undergrad students who are climate activists. So I just found this, and it was just, I thought these were implausible. There's another one where actually by an interesting guy who's I think been involved in Objectivism named Jordan McGillis, who wrote for the Manhattan Institute. And I thought it was really unfair. I mean, it was a lot kind of like Alex Epstein doesn't engage in, this is kind of what Tyler brought up in a certain sense, like not engaging enough with mainstream economists, but it was pretty dismissive, like, hey, nothing to see here. And I actually wrote them and I said, hey, can I submit a letter to the editor? He says I don't cover this, but look, here's quotes of where I cover all these things he claimed I didn't cover. So this doesn't accurately represent. And they said, no, we don't do letters to the editor, but you can put a comment. And I just figured, well, nobody's really seeing this. So I figured I'm just going to do an aggregate where I do a video on all of them at some point with Stefan on my team. So I didn't, and there's one or two others maybe, but then recently in the last week or so, the most inconvenient time, because I had so much other stuff going on, I saw one from Tyler Cowen and one from a guy named Roger Pielke Jr. So both very smart guys. Roger is a really interesting guy. He's kind of a traditional Democrat politically, but he's a big debunker of climate disaster claims. Okay. And he has this, interestingly, because he debunks a lot of climate catastrophism, yet he still calls for fairly aggressive anti-fossil fuel action. So I had, Roger had like, anyway, I'd sort of done a favor for him and he said, what can I do? And I said, read my book, knowing that he would probably be critical, but I wanted to have these criticisms out there. So I'll talk about his at some other point because I haven't written my thing, but Tyler was an interesting one because it was by far the most prominent.
Yeah, so let's do Tyler's.
Yeah.
You know, maybe
we'll do
5-10 minutes because
okay. I'll do it even faster. Yeah, so it's really quick to read, so people can read it. And the what struck me about it that's not just interesting with the book, but I think as a general phenomenon that he helped clarify, is it does two things. So one is it portrays the argument of fossil future in a way that is totally different from the actual argument. Like he portrays fossil future as advocating increased emissions for centuries. And fossil future is like really clearly focused on, when it says more oil, coal, and natural gas, not less, it's really focused on the next 3 decades, which is the timetable that we're making all these policy decisions and that we're being told to rapidly eliminate. So it's in this period we're told rapidly eliminate, we actually need to increase. So that's the argument. And then afterward, it's basically saying, well, I'm for liberating alternatives. So as quickly as possible, they can grow. And at some point, I talk about hopefully nuclear can replace fossil fuels. And I give principles for making policies in the future. But like, it's pretty clear if you read the book, I am definitely not saying increase fossil fuel use forever. And yet I get straw manned that way. So that was odd, although not totally unfamiliar, but I thought it was odd that someone of Tyler's intelligence would do this when it's pretty plainly not the case. But then the other thing I noticed that was really more illuminating for me, but I realized the other reviews do this as well, is the portrayal of the mainstream view was much softer or more mild than it actually is. So the way Tyler portrayed the mainstream view is we need to reduce emissions at some point over the next several centuries. And it's like, this is not the mainstream view. There's no question about this. Every organization, every government practically is saying rapidly eliminate fossil fuels by 2050. So it's interesting that not only did he straw man my view, but he does what I'm probably going to call it soft man, or I might use mild man, but I'm tentatively using soft man, the other view. And what that means is you take a position, like a dangerous position, that if people heard it literally, they should regard as extreme, but you soften it to make it seem mild and non-threatening. And it occurred to me that this phenomenon of straw manning a challenge to the establishment and then soft manning the dangerous establishment view is very, very common. I'm sure it happened to Ayn Rand in many, many ways
Mhm.
all the time. And you hear like her challenge of self-sacrifice, right? And it's like, oh, Ayn Rand is like, wants to enslave people and wants to sacrifice others. And then the establishment is just like, no, we're not for sacrifice at all. We're just for, we're just for help a little old lady across the street, right? So you start to see, so this is what I found fascinating, is this hybrid of straw manning and soft manning is a very popular way to discredit and dismiss powerful challenges to the establishment. And what I think is clearly going on in practice with Tyler is he is in a sense part of the establishment. Now he is much less extreme than the establishment, but for various reasons, I've looked through all of his writing on this, he does not want to challenge the establishment for as deadly as it is. Maybe he doesn't think it's deadly, but I think it's pretty clear with the energy crisis, it's pretty deadly. So he'll like kind of make peripheral criticisms, but he doesn't want to challenge the establishment. And also he doesn't fully agree with me at all. So when my view comes along, what he's doing is he's distorting my view, but then he's also distorting the mainstream view. So it looks like, and what you get is you get a message. You get for the new view, you get, hey, there's nothing to see here. This is just kind of a crazy view, nothing to look at. And then with the dangerous establishment, you get nothing to worry about here. Hey, there's nothing that we need to be concerned about. And I found this very, very clarifying. And I noticed that in so many quote reviews, this is what's happening. They're distorting my view and they're evading my challenge to the establishment, which is based on what the establishment actually says and does. So I found this very helpful.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think it applies to so many other issues and so many other things. It's really helpful to think about things this way. And particularly from intellectuals who don't want to take a principled position against the establishment. This seems to be a convenient tactic, but in a sense, this is how they legitimize the establishment and make the agenda of the establishment a reality. They are the enablers. They really are the enablers of the establishment.
Yeah, and you see this a lot. One example I bring up in the thing that I'm going to publish soon is you look at like mainstream climate scientists who don't speak up when their views are misrepresented to be climate catastrophe or climate apocalypse.
Yep.
So somebody like Tyler would say like, hey, those are the people you should respond to and engage with. But those people need to stand up, and economists need to stand up when people are having a mainstream view that you think is extreme from your perspective. This is not quite the way I would think about it because like the principle is wrong. But if from your perspective, it's extreme to the point of being dangerous, you need to speak up. You can't just say, oh, their heart's in the right place. Like they're just going a little far. Like that's what enables people to think that science says that we need to get rid of fossil fuels in 27 years, which would be the most destructive act in human history, in my view. But
absolutely.
Yeah.
Did you send the book to John Cochran at Hoover?
I don't think so. I don't know if I know, if you remind me, or if you have his contact info. I don't think I did. He would be a great person though. He's a really good thinker on this stuff.
He's a really good thinker, and he is. He's a good thinker generally. And I think he would, I'd be really curious what he thought of the book. I think he'd really.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good point. I remember actually, I saw Robin Hanson write a review, which was much more fair than Tyler's, but then I confused them actually. So I'm like, oh, he has it, but they're not quite the same person.
So John Cochran is good. So he's somebody you should definitely send the book to.
Okay.
I think his address is at the Hoover Institute. Somebody can easily find it. I have his email, I think, somewhere, but I think it might be still his Chicago email. All right, let's jump in here. We've got, let's see.
Let's make $1,000.
Yeah, we're 230 short of the 900, so we're getting close. Dave asks, yes, Dave, $100. Do you think one of the reasons to so many it would be a jiu-jitsu question. Do you think one of the reasons so many objectivists are attracted to jiu-jitsu is because it is inductive, whereas so many other martial arts are deductive? There's also playful and joyful informality with jiu-jitsu that you don't get from other martial arts.
Man, I have more jiu-jitsu questions on this podcast than certainly every other podcast combined. I think that's probably a pretty good answer. I think I mean, another way to put it is it's just very intellectually intricate, and there's a lot to learn. And one way to think of it is, in jiu-jitsu, it's very unusual in how much of the capability can be acquired by like learning more things versus say basketball. You can always learn a little bit more about basketball. So much of it is based on physical attributes, whereas jujitsu, you can get more and more capable just by learning ways to move your body that pretty much anyone can do. So it's just super intellectual. And I think the questioner is basically right. So I don't know if that answer is worth $100, but your question was already
Adam,
too
he
bright for
always
me to
asks
add
about
much.
jiu-jitsu whenever you're on my show. Dave asks
Okay,
some
well,
questions about
yeah.
jiu-jitsu. So he's obviously satisfied. Adam says, congrats on all your success, Alex. How did fossil fuels become your area of focus? How did objectivism help you form your narrative and or navigate the pushback you've received from today's media, science and culture?
I'm trying to think. There's one of my talks where I think, I think in 2019 or so, there was a talk I gave. You can find it. It's on ARI's YouTube, called The New Moral Case for Fossil Fuels, where I talk about this a bit. So you can go there for a full answer. But I mean, the way I got into it was pretty random. I mean, as Yaron and I always talk about, like, I wasn't at all specialized. I wrote about a lot of different things. And I was actually researching a project on the history of business journalism and learning about Rockefeller in the early oil industry that made me really realize that energy is the industry that powers every other industry, and that the more, cost-effective energy is, the more productive and prosperous, and the better every industry is, and that the thinking about energy is very consequential. And I found it, I just thought this is something I could affect. And then also the subject matter was very interesting. And I tend to be drawn toward fundamental things. So it's like, if you apply the fundamental science philosophy to the fundamental industry energy, I mean, arguably finance is fundamental, but fundamental from two different perspectives.
Yep.
It was this very powerful thing that I thought I could impact. And then I started getting good results. What was the other part how do I deal with
And
this?
how did
objectivism
help you form the narrative?
I talked about this a lot on that talk, but if you think about philosophy, one perspective is it helps you with thinking methods, assumptions, and values. So if you look at fossil future, like the thinking methods, the assumptions, values, all of that hugely influenced my understanding of both the good and the bad are influenced by objectivism. I mean, you have like considering the full context versus only looking at side effects and not benefits, or like what I call the delicate nurture assumption, or the positive is wild, viewing the earth as wild potential, versus a delicate nurture, viewing humans as producer improvers versus parasite polluters. Like, this is very influenced by objectivism. And then from the value perspective, when you're looking at the world as a whole, like advancing human flourishing versus eliminating human impact, it's all very influenced. And then also I'd say, in terms of dealing with the response, just the idea of an objective reality. And if somebody makes a valid criticism that has evidence, that affects me and I really think about it. But if people just say like random insults, I just think of it as they're not accessing reality. And it really feels like a 4-year-old making fun of me for not believing in Santa Claus.
That's good. Jeff just says, great to get an update from Alex for $100. That's great.
Oh, wow.
Shazbot says, how many solar panels does it take to build a solar panel?
The problem is right now, we don't have the ability to really do anything with solar panels because they don't power all the machines necessary to build a solar panel. And also, if you just want to power things with solar panel, you need huge amounts of battery backup. So I would say check out my Twitter today, because Elon, who unblocked me recently. I don't know if you know this, he unblocked me recently.
Oh, good.
Brought me like 16 million impressions by responding to 2 of my tweets. He keeps posting this thing about how a small patch of solar panels can power the world, and I keep refuting it. And people keep asking him to answer, like Jordan Peterson has asked him to answer, and Scott Adams has asked him to answer. So last time I checked, he hasn't answered, but just look at that and it'll give you a good answer to this.
Good. All right. Shazbot also asks, each for $50, would a hiring freeze in many of the alphabet agencies be a good thing to do if you were president? I mean, I, for one, would start firing people. I don't think freeze is
firing spree.
Good enough.
Yeah, I mean, it's this kind of thing where like an even better version of that, but still not perfect. But it's not terrible. Was not totally terrible as what Trump did in terms of like no adding regulations unless you remove 2 or 3. Like,
yeah,
it's okay to have stuff like that, but you really need to think in principle about how do we change the role and the purpose of these agencies and their specific regulations. I
mean, some agencies you might actually temporarily have to increase the staff because of the workload associated with getting rid of.
Oh yeah, and you take something like insofar as you have all this federal land ownership, like you would give more staff so that they can approve more leases and more development. So it's really not, it's kind of like a pure libertarian in the bad sense way of thinking about things. Just say like, oh, the solution is always for government to do less.
All right, friend Casey asks, how might environmental regulations interfere with our ability to go to space and colonize new planets? And how should I advocate for freer markets in space exploration and technology?
Can you repeat the end of the sentence? It got frozen for a second.
Oh, sorry. How should I advocate for freer markets in space exploration and technology?
Well, I mean, environmental regulations are hugely destructive on all development, all innovation. So if you just think about, I mean, the more you're trying to do new things on a very large scale, the harder it is to do every element in terms of mining the materials and processing them and doing new things. I mean, one benefit space has had is that you have this cult hero, Elon, who I think has sort of greased things in terms of making it easier because he's popular, and that's been a really good contribution on his end, is sort of making space cool, leaving aside like welfare elements to what he's doing. But in terms of how you do it, I mean, I talk about in Fossil Future what I call arguing to 100, which is the idea that you always want to be you want to be setting and arguing for a positive goal, and arguing that the policies you advocate bring us toward a good place, versus just trying to refute the other side setting a positive goal and then trying to shoot down their particular proposals. So I haven't worked out how to do it in space. I think Elon probably gives us a lot of clues because he's been successful. I mean, one of the things that's cool in space is just the mining potential. If you look at that, I mean, you see these asteroids and they have like, you can't really put dollar values on these things because the dollar value would change if you had a lot more of it. But it's like, $250 billion worth of some material. It's really cool to think about having these relatively pure things where you don't even need to dig in the ground. You just sort of get an asteroid. So we should at least be excited by that possibility. I don't really know how near it is.
The Japanese landed a kind of a little spacecraft on an asteroid, last year, which was so cool, right? So now, it's the next step is to mine and bring stuff back, but just to be able to land on something that's moving that fast. And I thought that was really cool. There's
also Varda. I don't know if have you seen these guys? Varda, it's Delian. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but he's one of the Founders Fund guys. They're doing space manufacturing, which I found very cool. So what they're doing, why would you do manufacturing in space? But the idea is it's like the ultimate clean room environment.
Zero gravity, yeah.
Yeah, zero. So it's like you can do all these precision things, including biotech things, where there's just no disruption by the elements. And that guy, I don't know him personally, but he's a very impressive guy. At least you watch him get interviewed. He's very pro-American, pro-freedom guy. Delian, Delian. You can, I think he goes by that on Twitter.
Yeah, I mean, I think they still send little biotech experiments to the space station because you can do stuff in space that you can't do on because of the contamination. All right, Adam asks, Alex, please comment on Germany objecting to the new Westinghouse nuclear power plant in Poland. Also on nuclear power plants being held hostage by Putin in Ukraine. Should the U.S. Senate ratify the Budapest Memo to make it a legally binding treaty?
So unfortunately, I don't know the specifics of any of these, which I'm really surprised by, that you could ask 3 questions related to this that I don't have enough. So you got to give this guy his money back. I mean, obviously we know in general, Germany has just a horrific anti-nuclear policy that it's gotten to the point where they've just in response to Fukushima, they just started shutting down all these perfectly functional plants for no good reason at all. And there's like temporary slowing down of it, but you look at their nuclear trajectory, it's just boom.
So now they're objecting to nuclear power plant in Poland.
Right, but I don't know the reasons, but I can't imagine they're good.
No. And the Japanese, at least, are now, I guess, recommissioning a lot of the power plants they closed down after Fukushima.
Fukushama's the end of history guy.
I know.
What was I going to say? Oh yeah, I mean, nuclear. One of the interesting things going on is that there's a real reemergence in interest in it, and the whole green movement opposition to nuclear is finally getting exposed for just totally ridiculous if they actually cared about any kind of pollution or climate thing that they claim to care about. But we haven't seen any real change in the policies. That's a lot of what I'm working on, but it's going to be really interesting to see what happens as long as the government is just controlling this, because you're just going to have I imagine a lot of cost overruns and issues, and it could easily get discredited unless they really change the policies.
There's too much inertia at the regulatory agencies, and then, yeah, they're going to be risk averse. I mean, there's a much bigger incentive if you're a regulator to slow down these projects, make them cost overruns, and there's to prove them if an accident happens, and then you get blamed for it. So it's sad, but it's going to be very difficult in the US to overcome kind of the inertia. Justin asks, could climate change lead to a lack of genetic biodiversity, and could that be catastrophic to global food supply?
I think the biodiversity thing is one of these things just thought of in way too vague a way. And so far as you're thinking of any value there, you need to be like specific about, okay, what types of things do we need and why? Like, and you can think of it on the level of bacteria, which that's probably the more plausible level. You can think of like, what do we need to eat and survive and protect ourselves against diseases and stuff. So I think the question is thought about too vaguely. Also, it's a very weird modern thing that we think of climate change as this huge driver of extinction and this kind of thing. Like, what human beings have, like, usually the way things go extinct is invasive species. It's not that you have very slow moving changes in temperature, because all these species are adapted to wide ranges of temperature already. So I think just what happens is everyone thinks everything is climate. So when they think of anything changing, they think of it as climate related change. Insofar as any of these issues are issues, you want societies that have a lot of energy and a lot of wealth, and in particular energy that doesn't depend on using live nature around you, such as wood, animal dung, but also ethanol, the way it's done now. And so I think it's a thing where people need to think of these things from a pro-human perspective. They need to think of energy as the friend of having a natural world that's good for us, and that allows us to have more control over it.
All right, Weave 8060. Do you plan to participate in any EPA comment periods, such as the proposed ominous methane emissions rules?
I would love to participate in all of them. I have bandwidth issues. I mean, I haven't announced this yet, but I am, if there are any listeners, and you have to listen carefully, like if you're an amazing writer and you know a ton about these issues, and in particular, you know a lot about policy, and these are actually true, and there's evidence of this, reach out to me, because we are recruiting and we can pay well, but that's why we need more help, because we have me and Stefan and a little bit of other help, but it's the demand is just crazy right now.
That's great. What a great problem to have. All right,
yes.
Alex, seems like you really impressed Jordan Peterson during your interview. I wish you brought up and discussed objectivism with him more explicitly. All right, you think you can get Jordan to have you on his program? Not your job.
I think he knows you. So, I mean, I mentioned you on his show, I believe.
Okay.
I don't know if you saw the last segment, because the last 30 minutes. So I don't know if this person saw it. So I think they have to pay like $8 to the Daily Wire or something if they want to see it, if they want to subscribe for a month. But yeah, the last 30 minutes is where you discuss more your intellectual background. And I'm quite sure I mentioned Yaron. I mentioned him privately, because I've talked to Jordan since, or maybe both. But yeah, so I talk about Ayn Rand and her role in these things, and I will mention Ayn Rand when it comes up. And what was the other part of it?
Good.
What did he want?
He wanted you to get me on Jordan Peterson's show. Here's another Jordan Peterson related question. Alex, how did the philosophical discussion with Jordan Peterson transpire? So I guess how did it go that second half, and then how did you get on Jordan Peterson's show? Is
well, I got on Jordan Peterson's show. I mean, there are a bunch of mutual connections we had, but I believe the person who really put it over the top is our former energy secretary and former governor of Texas, Rick Perry, who's been the single biggest booster of my book. He's gone on national television at least 6 times and told people to buy it. And
good. Good.
Yeah, we're planning on doing this huge Earth Day event in Texas that has some huge audience.
He also knows me. I know Rick Perry. We once
Okay,
I did it together. Yeah.
there
So,
you go.
yeah.
There you go. So, yeah, Rick, I think he just encouraged a lot of people. And so
Good.
he encouraged Jordan. And then Jordan, actually, if you saw the show, he actually somehow did not know about Fossil Future when we did the interview, but then right afterward, he immediately read the whole thing. And then we talked about it. And I think he's interested in doing more about it. But it just goes to show, I always say this, like, recommending, if you like my work, you like someone else's work, like, recommend it to influential people. You'd be shocked at how big a difference is. Since then, Jordan has mentioned me on a show at least 4 times. He mentioned me on the Joe Rogan Experience when he was there. And I've gotten to know him a bit and have some interesting conversations. And I think we'll do another conversation in some form in the future.
Good. Let's see. Josh says, really enjoyed Fossil Future and appreciate your work, Alex. How is Thoughtful going? Any plans for a web or Android version?
So Thoughtful people can check out at thoughtful.community/Alex. So this is my app that I've created with Brian Amridge, who some of you may have heard of, used to work at Facebook and is a really smart guy. So you could think of Thoughtful as we think of it as helps you extract the gold from the internet ocean of content. So the internet just has this unlimited content. It actually has unlimited good content, but it's drowned out by all the junk, just like the gold has, the ocean has limitless gold, but it's drowned out by everything else. So Thoughtful, through various means, helps you get the gold from the ocean. Again, you can check it out at thoughtful.community/Alex. Android is probably going to take longer than web. We actually have a Mac version that works well behind the scenes that we just haven't shared, but we've been making a lot of improvements to it that'll be out soon. So check it out, but it's only on iOS right now. So unfortunately, you can sign up for an Android mailing list, but don't go there and then get really mad at me because it's not on Android, because I told you it's not on Android.
Okay, so denk deal durch, something in German. Anyway, to Yaron and Alex, any plans for lectures or public speeches, more specifically in continental, Central or Eastern Europe, like Germany, Austria, and Switzerland? None of those are in Eastern Europe. Not a single one of them. Anyway.
That's a good.
Any plans of giving
a better answer than
Europe?
I had? No, I don't. I'm talking about doing something in Australia. I don't know. I think of speaking as like it's sort of a side thing for me. So I only do it for money, and usually
they pay really.
That's a limited number of kind of groups have the budget for it. So, and usually like in Europe, where I guess we're not really talking about Eastern Europe, but in terms of those places, there's not as big an appetite for my ideas as I would like. So if any of you are there anywhere else, go to alexepstein.com and you can go to services and speaking to do it. I'm happy to do it if I have the time, but it's no, I'm hugely US based, after that Canada, and then occasionally there's some other country. But I'm trying to do everything so that everyone can get my stuff for free on energytalkingpoints.com. And there's already so much footage of me speaking already.
Yeah, but there's more of me, and I still produce more. Anyway, next week I'll be in Prague, Brno, Bratislava, and Tbilisi, and then the week after that I'll be in Warsaw and Zurich and somewhere else. Anyway, so if you're interested, go to my website and you can find my schedule for the next 2 weeks. I will be in Central, Eastern, and even a little bit in Western Europe. I will be speaking in all those places. And
so
I'm
how are you getting hosted?
What's that?
That's awesome. How are you getting hosted? Like what kinds of groups are hosting you?
Student groups. It's all student groups. So the ARI pays me to do it. So I'm not, if I looked for groups that could pay my fee, I wouldn't find any. So
that's still cool. Well, also, I mean, different, like, you're much more of like a teacher than I am and a speaker. Yeah. So like,
this is what I do. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll do cool. 16 talks in 2 weeks and in, I don't know, 7, 8 countries. And I love it. So it's
awesome.
Enjoy it. Let's see. Yeah. And you should, one of these days should get you to Tbilisi. They're fun in Tbilisi. What impression did you have of Albertans? Understanding of the issues at your presentation. Congratulations, an amazing book. So Yale is an Albertan, I think.
So there's one really big one and then a smaller one I did in Alberta recently. It's really hard to have an impression just by going to a place. I mean, the people at this one event were very, very passionate, and it might have been the best. It's the best response I can remember in the last year. It was super
That's great.
fun, and I had an amazing time. And it was, I guess, particularly in Canada, I enjoy when the people are very passionate and more principled about these things, because sometimes you get less of that in Canada. So I had a great experience, but I can't come up with any universal truths about Alberta based on it.
Would you go, KFAX asks, would you go on a left-leaning shows to talk if invited? Have you in the past, or have you tried?
Yeah. And in fact, I have a much lower bar for going on left-leaning shows. I just have, because I'm mostly doing writing and research and advising politicians, I have sort of very limited bandwidth for going on shows. So I have a certain like audience size that is my cutoff for friendly shows, but then for unfriendly shows, it's much lower. So there's one I'm talking with now, but yeah, if you're an unfriendly show and you have any kind of audience at all, and you're willing to read my book, then I'll come on your show.
Reach out. All right. Adam asks, and by the way, you've gone over $900. So
right, take that, Gina Gorlin.
You're in the lead now. So we'll see what I have coming up next. Does the scientific community have any rational or valid points on the climate change that the world should pay attention to?
Is that's the whole question?
That's the whole question.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one point I make in Fossil Future, I think there's a lot of valid research. The problem is how it gets synthesized, how it gets disseminated, how it gets evaluated. I mean, one real tragedy is like the whole field of climate science needs to learn what I call the human flourishing framework. And in particular, it cannot have this view that impacting nature is intrinsically bad. Because what you really need is a climate science that would be able to tell you if CO2 were net positive, if that were true. And today's climate science is totally incapable of telling you that, because the whole premise is like, we shouldn't be impacting nature. Climate change is all bad change, et cetera. So it's really tragic, because we want all the specialists to really tell us in like a clinical way, hey, what are the positives and negatives of this on its own? And then if I talk about a lot, well, even when there are negatives, we can neutralize them or sometimes turn them into positives with our mastery. But it's one example of this I found so revealing is I read a story a couple of years ago, a reader sent it to me, and it was about scientists talking about Earth. And they said, Earth is a great place for humans, but it's not ideal. Like the ideal planet would be, now wait for this, 3 degrees Celsius warmer.
God.
But they didn't even mention that the whole quest of the world is to avoid getting 3 degrees Celsius warmer, and that we're willing to destroy the world to prevent. So it's just like, I want the scientists to be able to think that thought, but in the realm of climate, instead of just in one obscure article when they're thinking about habitability in a galaxy sense.
Yeah. And there's this Garden of Eden assumption, that there's just some perfect situation where human beings just can lie flat and man will just drop from heaven, and right. Effort is perceived as a negative, right? Effort, work, all perceived as negative. So, all right, PB asks, friends of mine all drive electric cars. I'm sure they believe the current energy propaganda, no interest in new ideas. Any way to get their attention regarding the contradictions?
I mean, they really have no interest in ideas. That's pretty bad. Maybe get new friends. I don't really find that many people that I run into, and maybe I get a biased sample, who have no interest in ideas. But I don't know, you could ask them why they drive an EV and try to ask that in an innocent way, and then see what's going on. And like, one interesting question is just, what do they think about, this is not the only thing to ask, but one interesting thing is like what they think about the process, the whole process involved, including right now, unfortunately, there's a lot of human rights abuses involved in making EVs. I'm curious. I don't think that's inherent in EVs, but it's definitely true today.
Because because the materials come from Africa, is that?
Yeah, like a lot of the cobalt is in Congo and stuff. And in general, the whole, we have this anti-development, so-called environmental movement that offshores so much industry. Yeah. And most of the green stuff is built there. And so we just don't pay there's not much attention paid to what happens to their environments there and what happens even to people's lives there. And in fact, sometimes it's not caring about those things as a means to getting the prices lower.
Yep.
But I don't know, there's something odd about people really aren't interested in ideas at all. I just don't find that that's really true of a lot of people. So maybe there's something wrong with your approach. Maybe you just tragically picked the wrong group, but there's probably something you can change too, besides the specific argument.
Yeah, I think people are reluctant often to express their ideas, but I agree with you. I think it's or lack the confidence to talk about ideas, but I think almost everybody out there, particularly people who are buying EVs, so they have the money to buy EVs and they're interested in EVs, they probably have some ideas rattling around in there. It's just a question of finding the right way to get at them. And I think your suggestion about how to ask the question is good. Let's see, what are some unfriendly shows you've been on and any clips on your YouTube channel? I might want to use them as ammo. Thanks for your coverage. Some K-facts.
What unfriendly shows have I? Well, the most obvious thing that comes to mind is debates. I've done a lot of debates. So people can see I did one at University of Texas, and there are a bunch of clips on my YouTube channel. There's one with a guy named Andrew Dessler, so you could look up my name and Andrew Dessler. There's one live debate and then one kind of quasi debate we did on Jordan Peterson's show. I did one with a guy named Wesley Clark, General Wesley Clark. You could look that up. But if you just look up Alex Epstein, that was a really interesting one. Yeah. That was another soft man, by the way. It was like, he agreed, this always happens. They agree to debate net zero by 2050. And then they get on the stage and they say, no, I just think we should explore alternatives to fossil fuels.
Yes. Yeah, I know. Yeah. It's like my socialist debates to say, I'm not against capitalism. I think capitalism is great. Right. We just need to control it a little bit and contain it a little bit. That's all. And really, Ayn Rand really really nailed that in Atlas Shrugged, because, so many of the villains, the statist villains say like, oh, I love capitalism and I love the free market. And it's really true that when I was debating, another one from 2019 was I did it with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And like his whole posturing was, oh, I'm a capitalist. Like I'm a huge capitalist. All right, so we have a string now of $5 and $10 questions, so we're going to do these fast.
Okay.
All right, Catherine just says, Fossil Future changed how I view the world. Thank you.
Well, thank you. If you want to do me a huge favor, email alex@alexepstein.com and write that in more depth. And
cool.
I always love having these testimonials.
Clark Young says, is jiu-jitsu one of the last pockets of benevolence left in the world? That's why so many young people gravitate towards it for their mental health.
I don't know if it's funny because jiu-jitsu, there's this guy named Gordon Ryan who's amazing, and he's by far it's like a uniquely dominant athlete today, and I'm a huge fan of his. His Instagram is Gordon Loves Jiu-Jitsu, but you couldn't really call him benevolent most of the time because he just does incessant trash talk with anybody who criticizes him. So I don't know if there's some benevolence, but I think just the activity itself is really fascinating and interesting and enjoyable. The culture, I think, has various facets, some benevolent, some not.
We've $20 says Congressman Dan Crenshaw from Texas has been tweeting a lot about energy and clearly has been impacted by you. So I don't think that's a question, but a statement.
I was on his show. I was on his show twice. If people want to check that out, we did 2 pretty good episodes. If you search his name and mine.
Caleb says geo steering a rig in Wyoming. As I listen here, just wanted to say thanks. Lots of guys I work with know of you and your book, Alex.
That's cool. By the way,
one steering is.
One thing that's been cool to see is just that in the last year in particular, I've noticed like getting recognized so much more. And it's really nice to meet people. So if you see me in person, just say hi. But part of it is just, I like that the strategies I'm using are working and that people like the work. Like I was at TSA recently and the guy took my idea and is like, thanks, Mr. Epstein. I love your work. I was like, oh, that's great. I was at the Magic Castle last week and I was trying to find the bathroom and this guy stops me and says, hey, Alex Epstein. And he was one of the magicians there. And he is actually an apprentice of like the best card manipulator in the world. And it's cool to just see it happen. In my neighborhood, people start to recognize me, like, oh, I saw you on TV. Wait a second, because I never tell anyone what I do.
Yeah.
So it's cool to see that people are really getting it.
Good. All right. Justin says, you tend to emphasize how the green movement hurts the poor the most. Why focus on the poor over the middle class and rich?
I don't know. Okay, well, I would say, oh yeah, do I focus more on how it hurts the poor than the rich? Probably yes. I think one thing is it's in, like, part of when you're trying to make a case for something, there's different amounts of context of knowledge that are required for different things. And I think kind of the most obvious thing that the green movement is not concerned about human life is its indifference to people who have very little energy and obviously need more. So I think that that's one reason why I focus on it. But yeah, I try to focus on it for everybody, and certainly in Fossil Future, I talk about it for everybody. And one thing I really make a point of in Fossil Future is the poorer places are not places we just need to be giving a lot of charity to. That they're places that need to change their policies a lot. So
Yep.
we should not be interfering. But it's not like we've failed the poor world and that's why they're poor. But we are doing an injustice by restricting them, and we're
Yes.
also doing an injustice by not telling them the truth that freedom is necessary and that cultural change is necessary.
Absolutely. Let's see, more jujitsu. People often say studying martial arts, particularly Brazilian jiu-jitsu, is a great way to control your ego. Is this a bad formulation?
It's definitely a bad formulation. I was talking about this with a friend the other day who's not into objectivism. I don't have but the current word I'll use is something like vanity. Because I mean, the ego is the self, it's the mind. It's like, if you're using that to mean a bad thing, that's really wrong and not at all clarifying. But I think so yes, it's definitely confused. The best way I can think of it is like, I mean, here's another thing, like one thing it helps you with is if you have an unhealthy need to be superior to others, it's pretty good at helping deal with that because you just get throttled all the time, particularly at the beginning.
Yeah.
And sort of what you start to get is more of an objective way of looking at yourself as like, okay, I'm going to focus on myself and I'm going to focus on getting better. And whether I beat or lose to another person is not particularly important. And I think that's a very healthy, but that's really about developing a healthy ego.
Yep. All right, here's how to apply the knowledge system framework to the mRNA technology. Who should we trust when it comes to this new innovation? Well, so the idea of the knowledge system I talk about in Fossil Future is the idea that what we're told is expert knowledge and guidance comes to us through a system that involves kind of at the base, the researchers actually doing the research in the field, but then certain people synthesize it, and then certain people disseminate what's been synthesized to us, and then certain people help us evaluate it. And it's a hard thing to do. I mean, you know that there can be errors at any stage, including research, but usually the biggest errors come after research. I mean, one thing is and I thought ARI had a good podcast about this the other day, where Amish was involved, but also Mike Maz, I thought, made some good points about like certain claims and showing that there was like people were being non-credible. So, I mean, one thing is if you see people engaging in demonstrably non-credible things, that you can sort of write off that person. Yep. Also, I'd say with some of the analysis in Fossil Future, you can look for some of the same things. Like, are people ignoring the benefits of something and only focusing on negative side effects? Like, that's one thing to look at. Sometimes they could be ignoring negative side effects and only focusing on benefits. Or do they have an assumption that like unnatural things are bad? So for example, if you take like a criticism of COVID vaccines, anyone who treats the idea of a COVID vaccine as an undesirable thing, I will totally write off. Yep. Like it's similar with the people against nuclear, where it's one thing to say, oh, well, today's nuclear has some issue. I don't really think it does, but that's one thing. But when they write off nuclear technology as such, that's an anti-technology view. Or when people like glorify what they call natural immunity, which is not to say that it has, I mean, there's certainly a value, but like to glorify natural immunity as sufficient to deal with the danger of viruses, given what we know about human history, like
that's really off. So you want to look for what are methods, assumptions, and values that you think are good and which ones are bad. And that can tell you a lot about certain groups, I would say. And it can help give credibility. And then there's also just the specific thing with individuals of how do they give, how do they respond to different stimuli? How do they respond to criticism? How do they respond to questions? Et cetera. Generally, I mean, I know Amish a bit personally, but also just I think the way he's conducted himself, he definitely comes across as credible in many, many dimensions.
I agree completely. I agree. And I've actually on my shows on at least 3 or 4 occasions now have taken some of the claims against the mRNA vaccines and just looked at them, just actually read the paper. And I can do a little bit of statistical analysis. I know what they're talking about. And the claims that people make are so, non-objective about what the basic research is. That the basic research will say something and then they will turn it into something completely different and distort and pervert it. It's not that hard to figure out who the people on the right here and who the people on the wrong here are, broadly speaking. All right, John has, for $50, Fossil Future is an amazing book. Thank you, Alex. I recently finished Equals Unfair as well, and I loved it. Thank you both for your efforts at giving people a fuller context for these subjects. You're both heroes, in my opinion. Thank you, John. Really appreciate that. Write Alex, if you enjoyed the book, write Alex and give him a little blurb.
Yeah, Alex at alexepstein.com.
As he said.
Or also put it on Amazon too. I quote those all the time.
Even better, yes. Clark Young says, do you ever feel it is appropriate to discuss politics or philosophy in your jiu-jitsu academy? I find it is a great way to change the culture, but can lead to some awkward roles.
Well, I'm in a little bit of a different position because what happens is people learn about what I do at some point. I mean, the more prominent it gets, this did not used to be the case. So when I started jiu-jitsu, I'd sort of initiate with people. And I think you have to think of it as what is the main purpose of the activity. And if you're really focused on the purpose of the activity, which is to do jiu-jitsu, and then things naturally come up and you can talk about them in an organic way, that's one thing. But if you're turning the jiu-jitsu mat or school into your own personal bull session, which I'm sure I've done in the past, like that's not appropriate. Now, people, when I did it, I think found it entertaining, but now I'm sort of the opposite. Like people want to talk to me. We're about to fight. And they'll be like, oh, I saw you doing this, like talk about this. And I'll say, okay, well, let's talk about it afterward. Let's fight. And also I think in jiu-jitsu, it's very important that like the realm you're in, if you're doing something, is what matters. So one of the great things about jiu-jitsu is like the only thing that matters in jiu-jitsu is how you approach the sport. And so even if you're if you're like Brad Pitt in a jiu-jitsu school, you're still just, and you're a white belt, you're still just a white belt. And I think of it the same way. I don't think of it as, well, I know a lot about energy and I'm somewhat well known, therefore that makes me more important. It's really never true, but it's certainly not true in this. All that matters is the core thing. So don't think of it as your little activist ecosystem, I would say. But you'll find some interesting people who will be happy to talk to you.
All right, she wants more on jiu-jitsu. Clark. How do you cope with getting submitted by a lower belt? And what is your philosophy in training jiu-jitsu while injured? Do you find lifting weights helps your game? Okay,
so So one thing with jiu-jitsu is, in general, I think the best people do this, you want to be focused on like developing. You're not just generally focused on beating everyone up as much as possible. You're trying to develop specific skills and in particular, often specific positions. So there's different positions in jiu-jitsu, like the mount and side mount and being in the guard and this kind of thing. So I think of the way a lot of people train, and certainly the way I train, is like you put yourself in the position and then you try to work on things within the position. So I all the time put myself in the worst positions and try to get out of them. And you want to be rolling with somebody who can help you develop. And so often it's a lower belt, because if it's somebody better than I am and I'm in a terrible position, I'll just get finished or submitted really quickly and I can't even think. But you should just always be thinking about your skill development, and that will absolutely involve getting submitted all the time by lower belts. Also, the belt system it's not some perfect grading of people, and there are certain people who compete and they're a blue belt and they could definitely submit me, maybe even the majority of the time these days. There are so many good people who are, so just your goal is to improve, and everything is a means to that.
Well, something about the internet connection. You're frozen. Can you hear me?
Oh yeah, I can hear you totally. Did my answer come across though, or did it miss?
Man, really, really appreciate that. So you're way ahead of Gina and everybody else. Let's see. Fred Harper says, love the new book, Alex. Formulation of the knowledge system was eye-opening. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
It was $20. Let's see. James asks, who is the most pro-fossil fuel Republican you would like to see run for president? Ron DeSantis?
I'm not commenting on that one.
Commenting.
I mean, I don't endorse candidates at all. The last one I think I'll ever endorse is Michael Schellenberger, not because it went badly, but just you have to understand, I work with elected officials in this one specific capacity. I don't even have any public party alliance. So my view is I will help whatever person, assuming I think they're at all reasonable. So there's certain people I wouldn't help, but I will help people in this domain if I think it can be helpful. So I'm not going to endorse or pick any candidate publicly.
Do you think the big oil fires that Saddam said during the first Gulf War contributed to climate change? It went on for days polluting the sky.
Wait, what about it in respect to climate change?
Did it contribute to climate change? You remember the oil fires?
I mean, yeah, insofar as you're burning a bunch of hydrocarbons, it releases carbon dioxide. It wasn't, I don't think it wasn't like a transformative thing for the earth.
No. Is there a point in citing studies during lectures, debates? There's so much research out there that it seems like you can find the ones that back your particular claim.
I mean, I think you want to be familiar with the types of studies that exist, and if there's anything that's considered definitive, I think that's you want to be familiar. But in general, I think what's persuasive in debates is showing that you have a really good method of thinking, and also a mastery of the facts. But it's a lot about the method of thinking.
Are you guys getting Alex freezing, or is it just me?
Yeah, I don't know what's going on. I usually have a really good connection, but it's probably my fault. I don't know why. Uh-oh. Oh, no, it looks like I'm here, so it might be you're on. I can't tell if I'm talking to the audience or if Yaron is talking to the audience or what's going on. But in case it's me talking and I don't want to just sit here with the blank face, people are interested in learning more. I'd say the main things are go to energytalkingpoints.com, go to the website fossilfuture.com. You can learn how to get the book anywhere. You can get it basically in any country at one of the sites we offer. If you're a student or educator, you can get it at, what is it? You'll see Young America's Foundation offers something there. And then you can buy it in bulk. Some of you might be interested in speaking. You can learn about speaking there. It looks like you cut off. Did that happen?
So it could be that I cut off, and
I just started lecturing to the audience in case you had cut off.
Good.
I just told them how to get the book and
good.
And
well,
stuff like
the
that.
audience certainly seems to they're sticking around, so it's good.
And told them like 10 embarrassing stories while you were gone. So
all right. Yeah, you have quite a few. All right. Let's see. We have one more $20 question. Wow, a lot came in through here. All right. Any thought on Dave Rubin? I don't know how guest show relationships work out, but he is big, getting bigger, and has a Lonzia.
Oh no, sorry. It half of that cut out. Read it one more time.
So any thoughts on getting on Dave Rubin, basically?
On getting Dave Rubin? Well, I've been on his show before. I mean, I know him a bit. Yeah, I mean, I would like to be on again. I guess we were on for an Earth Day show a couple of years ago. I mean, in general, I'm eager to go on the show, so please recommend me. But my bandwidth is super taken up by other things, so I'm kind of I'm not super focused on any given show right now. I mean, over time, the shows take care of themselves, I think, if you're doing other stuff.
Yep. All right, Levin, thank you. Appreciate the support. Let's see, where were we? Wesley asked, do you think human civilization would have developed if fossil fuels didn't exist on Earth?
At some point. But I mean, it's a little weird to think about because they developed based on the nature of biology. So they're going to say biology doesn't exist. I mean, I guess the hypothetical would be, well, none of the organisms got stored underground and compressed into hydrocarbons and stuff. Then, yeah, it'd be a lot harder though, because you have to deal with live plants and animals, and that you're trying to do that more and more efficiently, and you're trying to harness the wind in the sun, and it's going to take a while to figure out uranium. So, but again, it's based on biology, so it's a weird hypothetical.
Florida Nick asks, has Alex read High Intensity Training, the Mike Mensa way, or is it at least familiar with his theory of exercise?
So I studied him in college, and I know my friend Chad Morris, whom I actually do remote training with weekly, has studied him a lot, but I haven't studied any of that stuff on my own in 20 years.
Yep. But it sounds like you used the method.
Yeah. Well, I don't know the method exactly, but yeah, I mean, I read his stuff, and I was really sad. He and his brother died like within a few days of one another.
Alex, have you considered running for Senate or governor? I think you've answered this. I think you would
I've
do
considered
surprisingly
and
well.
rejected it.
Okay. Michael asks, is Germany the more altruistic and nihilistic when it comes to being anti-fossil fuels and sacrifice their citizens' lives to the green agenda?
Wait, I thought would you say, are they being more of that, or are they
Yes, are they being more altruistic and nihilistic by doing this?
Well, that's sort of by definition. I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure the question was asked in the way it was intended. I mean, I think those elements are certainly involved in what they're doing. I mean, it's really bad. If you look at what my researcher Stefan is in Germany, and he always talks about to me just how, you look at their plans, and their plans are to use half as much energy in 2050. I mean, that's a really embarrassing plan for a human country.
Yeah. I'm trying to, some of these questions, the grammar just doesn't fit. I don't know what they're asking. So this is funny. One of Kubadada or something like that. One of the funniest lines I've heard an interviewer say to Alex is, so I heard the Chinese called you about your book, and Alex interjects, well, not all of them. So,
okay.
You're funny. You didn't know that.
Yes. Okay.
Boaz asks.
I'll have to reuse that line.
Oh, Boaz. Okay, this is a question Boaz asks every single interviewee I've had. Feel free to answer any part of this because he asked like 20 questions in one sentence.
Is this the Boaz we both know from Israel?
No, it's a different Boaz. This is a Boaz Galil. So it's a different Boaz. He says, tips for burnout parents of 8-month-old. And then how do we gain motivation and energy? And then what's your take on Bitcoin, NFTs, New York City, tech layoffs, inflation, remote work, China and Russia? So any one of those in very
the baby one I have zero expertise on at this point. Maybe the not too distant future I'll have more. What was after the baby? It's the
baby is
the burnout one. What was it?
Burnout, but that I think is related to the baby. So then it's
Bitcoin,
NFTs, New York City.
Okay, well, I mean, Bitcoin, I love the concept of. I mean, I love the idea of having like a decentralized currency. And I try to give them good moral arguments for using energy. And so if it's a really valuable thing, then it's good to use energy to produce valuable things. NFTs, it's too broad a thing. So obviously there's a lot of abuses, but there could be some value there. What else?
That's good enough.
All right.
Justin, as you said on a recent podcast that you are sympathetic to conspiracy theories. Can you clarify what you mean by that?
I think that is not a very good quote of me. I think we must have been talking about, I was on the Sam Tripoli show. He's a comedian and he has a show that's very, I think he would say it's devoted to conspiracy theories. So I think that what I would have said or what's true, and I don't even I think Ankar's comments on this made me stop calling them, I call them conspiracy beliefs not conspiracy
Theories is too much
theories.
credit. Yeah.
Yeah, there is like theory is an elevated term, but I think conspiracy beliefs are plausible because you see there are things in the world that in many ways don't make sense, and people don't seem bothered by them. And the establishment, it seems like there's something really wrong with the establishment.
Yep.
You have this even at the beginning of Atlas Shrugged, like Eddie Willard senses there's something wrong with the world. So, but then again, and it's kind of a primitive religion type thing where you think like you don't understand the way the world works. So you're like, oh, this God, like this human type thing must be causing it. And it's similar. You see something wrong in the world, it's like, oh, that's this group of conspirators who are making it happen, versus maybe no, it's this whole philosophy that in a sense was conspiratorial and promoting, but it has a life of its own. And a lot of my views are like, you spread these ideas and then they have a life of their own. And it's like philosophy is actually, these philosophical and other ideas are actually in charge.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. I think conspiracy theories are very easy to fall into once the knowledge system becomes unreliable. You're looking, and people need explanations. It's why religion took off. It's because they need the answer to why. And religion provides an answer, not a very good one, but it provides an answer, and people need answers. And when nobody else is reliable, they'll go with sometimes really crazy explanations. Okay, Caleb says, I see a lot of people that recently promoting fossil fuels, focusing on calling climate change a scam or environmental damage of green energy. Hopefully your work helps reframe the debate, because those tactics aren't very smart.
Yeah, I don't know how, I mean, you'll see climate, there's a day or so at least where climate scam was trending on Twitter, but I think it was partially people were trying to show that you could say this now under the allegedly beneficent regime of Elon Musk, which for some of us has not been the greatest experience. But yeah, I think it's, I don't think that's real. I think what's really growing are actually better arguments about this stuff. I do think the environmental damage of green energy, that is one that's growing and that is half good and half bad. So it's good in that people are thinking about the full process of energy production and not like looking at certain forms of energy as magical and causeless and free. And then others is just having all these details and negative consequences. But the kind of, there's almost a nihilistic element to it where it's just, you're just trying to shoot it down and say there's nothing that could be good. Like EVs are terrible. There's nothing good. And you definitely don't want to get into that. And I'm always advising people to not be against forced EVs and be against like abuses involved in EVs, but just don't be against the idea of EVs.
Yeah. And subsidized EVs, but yeah.
Yeah. All right, we got two more minutes.
Okay. Jay says, thank you, Alex. Your work in this interview are wonderful and inspiring, including new resources to check out. Thank you, Jay.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see. Alex Epstein has never lost an interview. I don't know how you lose an interview, but Anthony says, what is something you changed your mind about as a result of writing the book?
Researching the book. I mean, there's a bunch of smaller things. One was I still going into it had too much of the not considering enough the positives of warming from CO2, like I didn't really talk about that in Moral Case. Another thing on the other end was I think I was too focused in Moral Case. Moral Case was too much making the case for fossil fuels dependent on like the more extreme climate models being wrong. And in the new one, I give reasons why you should think they're wrong, but I argue that even if the extreme ones are right, the basic case is unchanged. So those are two.
All right, last question. What do you make of Bill Gates' view on energy? He typically refers to Vaclav Smil. I don't know who that is.
He's the guy worth knowing. So Vaclav is a really interesting guy. Must be the most prolific writer about energy in the world by a significant margin. He has so many books. He must have 70 books or something, and many of them are about energy. He's technically a geographer. He's generally very accurate on the details about energy. I've learned a lot from reading his books. He is philosophically, I don't think, let's just say I disagree with him on a lot of things. I think he very much has the view that like industry in general and fossil fuels in particular are necessary evils. So he'll make a lot of quote unquote practical arguments about them. I think Bill likes them because they're like technical and interesting. But I think, and unfortunately, Gates's energy views have regressed over time. Like he has this, and I mean, he's basically promoting a lot of climate catastrophism. And whereas in the past, he would really talk about the limits of solar, wind, and different kinds of battery schemes, solar and wind and battery schemes. Now he's much more supporting them. And in fact, he was arguably the biggest driver behind what's called the Inflation Reduction Act. It's a really, really bad law that involved all kinds of terrible energy policies, including literally unlimited extensions to solar and wind subsidies. Like they get extended until emissions go down by 75%, which is the like limitless period of time. And he really, like, there's stories, and I think they're accurate behind the scenes. Like he just used a lot of money and power to drive this thing, which he should know better than. So he's been, I think a lot of people have progressed, particularly as the energy crisis has brought stuff out, and hopefully since better arguments like mine and others have spread. But his views have not gotten better, they've gotten worse, at least his public views. And I think there's a kind of harkens back to what we're talking about with Tyler Cowen and the straw man, like straw manning new views and soft manning the establishment. Just so many people who are high status just don't do the right thing and really say there's something really wrong with the establishment. Yeah. And it's so much easier to just criticize, quote, extreme new people. But you look back in history and you wish people had more challenged the bad ideas of the establishment and supported good new ideas. So obviously this is a show that is doing that in the good way. And I'm grateful to everyone, including Yaron, for helping bring these ideas, because it really did help the launch of the book, the show that we did. And I hope that more people check it out and recommend it to hosts and influential people. And if you know anyone influential who'd like a signed book, just email me, alex@alexepstein.com.
Yeah, and check out the Substack and check out Twitter and check out the talking points. And thank you, Alex. Thanks for all the work you do. Thank you for being on the show. You now hold the record by a big margin. So I doubt that anybody's going to come close. We'll see.
What did we end up at? What did we end up
$1,400.
It's probably beatable, but yeah, get a Brad Pitt on or something like that.
If Brad Pitt would come on, yeah, I might pay $1,400. You know, so
there you go. You can subsidize it.
Although I'm not sure I want Brad Pitt on. Yeah, and Julita, on the other hand, I would probably pay the money.
Okay, well, as soon as they become fans of Fossil Future, I'll refer them and everyone else to the show.
Sounds good. All right, thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
Real pleasure. And those of you who ask questions that are not going to answer, I prioritized other questions above them just because of Alex's time. I've only got 4 questions, I think, that we didn't get to. I'll keep them around for next time. And thank you guys. I mean, you guys were great. Thank you for supporting Alex's work. Thank you for supporting the show. And I will see you all tomorrow morning on the news updates. And we'll have a show on Saturday at 2 p.m. And for the Europeans out there, I will be in Europe all of next week and all the week after that. So check out my website for the schedule of events. Check out the Ironman Institute website as well. But my website should have all the events on there. And if you're not sure, email me at yaron@yaronbookshow.com. But I will be in Czech Republic, in as I said, in Prague, Brno, Bratislava, Tbilisi, Warsaw, Zurich, Budapest, and Uppsala, Sweden. And of course, I will also be in the UK. I'll be in Exeter and I'll be in London. So if you're in any of those places, please come to the talk, say hello, mention the show. It's awesome to meet you guys in person. So I will see you all tomorrow morning. Bye, everybody.